Part 1. Causes of Disillusion and Pacifism in the United States. Background. When World War I broke out, U.S. policy went from isolationism to internationalism. After the war, the public wanted to go back to isolationism. Pacifists liked the idea of avoiding war. This practice continued on until the U.S. got involved in World War II. Dictators and the Spanish Civil War. Here's some background. Fascism actually glorifies war and preaches extreme nationalism / following a dictator. In 1922, Mussolini seized power in Italy through the Fascist Party. Germans were mad about economic ruin and shame from the Treaty of Versailles, so they found an outlet in Hitler. And in 1933, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. For the Spanish Civil War, it started when fascist forces in Spain, which were led by Francisco Franco, they tried to overthrow the government. The Soviet Union supported the government while the fascists got support from the dictators. Americans supported the government with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. The Civil War became a testing ground for new weapons, and ultimately Spain fell to the fascists in 1939. The Neutrality Acts of 1935 to 1937. Overview. Through the 30s, a majority of Americans wanted the U.S. to remain neutral to prevent involvement in another war. Due to this fact, Congress passed a bunch of neutrality acts that banned shipping arms or giving loans to belligerent nations, banned traveling by U.S. citizens on ships of belligerent nations, and non-military goods purchased by belligerent nations had to be paid for in cash and transported in their own ships. Triumph of aggression. Here's an overview. Dictators actually won against democracies in peace efforts. In 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland, and in 1938, he announced his intention to seize the Sudetenland. He broke the Treaty of Versailles a lot. Japan had a similar aggressive nature. They wanted to control and reign over East Asia, so they invaded Manchuria in 1931 and attacked the heartland of China in 1937. Mussolini also adopted the policy of military expansion. He told the Italian army to bring glory to the fascist cause, and Ethiopia fell to the Italians in 1936. FDR's quarantine speech. By 1937, FDR was super concerned about the acts of aggressors, so he gave a speech where he proposed that democratic nations should join together and quarantine the aggressor nations. The public did not like this idea, as they thought that this might involve them in a war. But we eventually got involved anyway. Appeasement and the start of World War II. British and French leaders adopted the policy of appeasement. And appeasement was giving in to the demands of an aggressor nation to avoid any conflict. They allowed Hitler to annex the Sudetenland. The British and the French hoped that Hitler would only want the Sudetenland, but spoiler alert, he doesn't. Germany ends up invading Poland in September of 1939. So the British and the French declare war against Germany, but Russia doesn't because they had already signed a pact with Germany. Germany used a style of fighting called blitzkrieg. It was super effective. So Poland, Denmark, Norway, and France fell by the June of 1940. At this point, Great Britain was the only one left to stop the dictators. Great Britain fought back against airstrikes and forced Hitler to call off the invasion on Great Britain. Gradual U.S. involvement. The public turned around and were willing to go to war when Hitler started destroying everybody. Roosevelt modified the previous neutrality acts and transferred 50 destroyer ships to Great Britain. And in return, the U.S. got some cool naval / air bases. This is called the Destroyer for Bases Agreement. It's a really creative name. And the Lend-Lease Act of 1941 led to the abandonment of neutrality and let the U.S. lease war supplies to the Allies. In 1941, Churchill and Roosevelt signed the Atlantic Charter. It recognized the right of self-determination for all nations. It promised to establish a permanent system of general security in the future, and both promised not to seek any territory from the war. The U.S. entered the war. Some background. The US punished Japan for all their acts of aggression by putting up an embargo on crucial goods and freezing all Japanese assets in US banks. Negotiations between Japan and the US continued, but Japan refused to stop being so aggressive. And in 1941, Japan thought the US were going to enter the war, so they actually surprise attacked Pearl Harbor. Due to this horrendous situation, the US entered the war and the public's isolationist sentiments finally vanished.